Hey guys, as usual, if you haven't watched Avengers Endgame yet, then this is your spoiler alert. It is time to tune away from this video, browse away from this channel, and only come back when you've watched the movie. But if you've watched the movie, then first of all, hell yeah, and second of all, welcome back guys. And on this video, we're going to be discussing all the time travel on Avengers Endgame. Alright, so to get started over here, let's set some ground rules. Let's talk about how they explain time travel on the movie, along with all the possibly obvious stuff that we could fall back to. So number one, they did make sure that they tell us that this is unlike any other time travel movie. It doesn't work the same way that we've seen on all other time travel movies. Number two, as a result of point number one, you cannot really change your past. You can never be able to change the events in your past. You've lived it, it is set in stone, you can never change it, but what you could try to work out is the future. You don't know the future is still to be written, so that's what they're trying to change over here. Number three, the major problem at the beginning of the movie is not about whether or not they can change the future, whether or not they can go to the past, but more of a matter of how they can do it. So it is basically all about how to, go through time instead of having time go through you. So it's basically all about that situation that we get to see with Scott Lang, baby Scott Lang, child Scott Lang, old Scott Lang, he's himself Scott Lang. Number four, the Ancient One does explain time travel even further, does explain the changes to the timeline even further in that conversation that she does have with Bruce Banner. So while the past of Earth 199,999, the Avengers that we know is actually set in stone, any change to the timeline does create a branching in the timeline. Now that branching in the timeline, or shall I say a new timeline, a parallel timeline, is gonna have its future, all the way from 2012 or 1970 or 2013 or 2014 up until 2023 and beyond, definitely alternated, definitely changed due to any changes that these Avengers create in the timeline. Number five, Tony Stark does make it even clearer on that scene where the Hulk is about to snap his fingers. Do make sure you don't change anything from the past 5 years. Now, I'm assuming over here that they shared knowledge as soon as they came back from their respective missions. I'm assuming as well that the Hulk told them all about the conversation that he had with the Ancient One. Like, hey, we gotta return the stones to the times that we took them from in order not to create totally messed up, totally effed up timelines where basically everything is completely screwed. That means that Tony's comment in this instance is not about the fear that, Professor Hulk would try to change everything about Natasha, bring her back as something, and then F up their own timeline, but rather create a branched timeline, one in which Nat is never sacrificed, and in that case, it's kinda totally effed up. They're never gonna be able to reverse what Thanos did. That's an alternate reality in which versions of themselves are totally screwed. But number six, we've got Tony Stark asking Stephen Strange during the battle at the very end of the movie, is this the 1 in millions chance that this is gonna work? And Stephen Strange tells him, if I tell you, it is not gonna happen. Now, I do understand that this is a reference to the 14 million possible futures that Doctor Strange did see. It is also a reference to his statement on Infinity War, it was the only way. But nonetheless, at this point in time in the events of the movie, I did not think of it as just a reference to another movie. I thought of it as something bigger, something of an explainer to something else on this movie that I'm going to be talking about on this video. But number seven, and this is not new to, time travel movies and time travel TV series, there could basically be anomalies on a given timeline, anomalies belonging to other timelines. Like for example, what the case is with Geek on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., after repairing the timeline or after saving the planet from the Wrath of Graviton, that version of Geek is still going to exist on Season 6 of Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., even though he does originally belong, in the broken timeline. That being said, we're left with one final point and then we can apply all of this to the events of the movie. So number 8, not every event in the past is a creator of a new timeline. Some of these events in the context of altering the timeline, changing the timeline, creating a new timeline, are basically nonsensical just in that context. As in, it doesn't make any kind of sense that they would impact the timeline in any way, shape, or form. So only events that significantly change the timeline, that create an actual deviation to the timeline, are the ones that create new timelines. Take, for example, the conversation between Bruce Banner and the Ancient One. That really changed nothing. She gave him the Time Stone, and at the end of the movie, Steve Rogers went back in time, gave her the Time Stone, so yeah, no changes over there. Nothing of any kind of impact, real impact on the events of the timeline. But alright though, let's start applying all of this to the events of the movie, and let's get started with the, farthest into the past trip that they made. The trip that Tony Stark and Steve Rogers made to 1970. Alright, so the conversation between Tony Stark and Howard Stark, that's nonsensical, it changes nothing about the future. The fact that Tony Stark took the Space Gem, the Tesseract, and then Captain America brought it back to the 1970s by the end of the movie made sure that's also a nonsensical event, one that does not change the timeline. Finally, we've got Steve Rogers stealing the Pym particles and then seeing Peggy Carter, when he was in her office. Those two events do sound nonsensical in terms of creating a branching to the timeline, creating a new timeline. As a matter of fact, these guys made it clear before they started their mission that their future lies in the past for the course of this mission. That could mean that Tony Stark was always supposed to travel to the past, to the 1970s, that he was supposed to inspire his father, give him that very quote that his father would later on use with him. Like it is basically a full-time loop over there. He hears the code from his father, he tells it to him, so his father tells it to him once again as he grows, and so on and so forth. But let us though move on and jump to 2012. Okay, so in 2012 there is the Bruce Banner, the Ancient One situation, which is basically nonsensical. There is no change to the timeline if they do return the Time Stone. However though, there's another change to the timeline on the Tony Stark side, that being Loki. So Loki over here does get hold of the Tesseract, does teleport out of the place right then and there, and that basically changes a lot of things. It changes the ending to the Avengers, it changes the ending to Thor the Dark World, and it probably ripples in effects going into Thor Ragnarok and then into Infinity War. And do remember over here that that's going to heavily affect Thor's life. Part of the motivation for Thor to fight Thanos even harder is basically all about the death of Loki. That also answers the question that I keep getting, or the comment that I keep getting in so many videos. Loki must be alive right now because we saw him in 2012, make a run for it using the Space Stone. The answer is yes, he is alive, but not in this timeline, not in the timeline of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but rather in a timeline that branched from the original the moment he picked that Tesseract and made a run for it. But that is the part with Tony and Scott Lang and whatnot. There is the part with Captain America, the elevator scene, and then the scene with Cap v Cap. So there are two ways to look at the elevator scene. The first of which, he took the Mind Gem, he's gonna return it back, so it doesn't really matter. It is nonsensical, and it doesn't change the timeline. And then there's the other one. He did reveal to these people that he's Hydra. He's not Hydra. So they're basically gonna discover that he's not once they report to their superiors, and they're gonna be like, okay, you know what, this guy knows about us, and everything from that moment is going to change for the Cap in that timeline. Now, in my personal opinion, I'd say that the moment that Steve Rogers decided to whisper Jasper Sitwell, "Hail Hydra," a new timeline was created in which Hydra will be basically acting differently than they did before, between the events of the Avengers and the events of Captain America Winter Soldier. Now moving on though to the Cap v Cap fight, the Cap v Cap fight is already in a new timeline because it is a product of Loki escaping the Avengers. The original Cap, or the younger Cap, sees our Cap and he's like, I've got eyes on Loki, so that's basically already in a new timeline, one that's already been in effect the moment that Loki used the Space Stone and teleported out. Now the fact as well that our Cap does decide to tell young Steve Rogers that Bucky Barnes is alive, that also changes the timeline completely. So yeah, that's definitely an all new branching in the timeline. Now obviously the events of Thor the Dark World has been kind of changed, completely changed by a lot of things. There's the meeting between Thor and his mother. Now that's possibly not a time-changing event, but the attack of Rocket on Jane Foster might actually change a lot of things. Like everyone back at the time is gonna be thinking, hey, what in the hell did that rabbit want with Jane Foster and the Reality Stone? That means as well that their course of action might be different, their choice of course of action, the kind of person that they start searching for at that moment is completely different. But moving on though to the mission on Vormir, there are no timeline changing events over there in the acquiring of the Soul Stone. It's basically all about the fact that Natasha Romanoff's future is in the past. And that kind of thing was explained clearly at the beginning of the movie, during the first hour and before they started traveling in time in order to retrieve the Infinity Stones or acquire the Infinity Stones. So let us move on to Morag because that's a big time changer. Now with the situation on Morag all the way up until they acquire the Power Stone, they've got no troubles, no problems, no actual drastic timeline changing events, even with the knocking out of Peter Quill. I mean, he's gonna wake up, he's gonna find the Power Stone to be there, because by then Steve Rogers will have returned it to its rightful time and its rightful place. However though, the major change in this part of the timeline happens when Nebula, younger Nebula, decides to take the place of the older Nebula. As a matter of fact, the actual change here happens, the actual branching of a new timeline happens when Nebula comes to our future, the younger Nebula, and she basically brings Thanos through, and along with his armies, he ends up being snapped out of existence by none other than Tony Stark. Now that takes us back to the entire speech that I made at the beginning of this video, about anomalies in the timeline, and it does make Thanos, his armies, Nebula, and Gamora anomalies in this timeline. It also poses the question of what happens with Gamora. There is the chance that, the anomaly Gamora does exist in our timeline. It is kind of evidenced by the possibility that they are actually looking for her. Peter Quill is looking for her at the end of the movie. But that also means a lot of other things. Number one, it means that they cannot bring Natasha Romanoff in the same way, because they would be creating another branching in the timeline that would basically ruin it for others. A new timeline with new Avengers without Black Widow, the probabilities are endless. So they're not going to doom an entire reality in order to bring Natasha back, and the same applies for Tony Stark. They cannot go back in time, bring people back that they want to bring into this future for no good reason. It ruins other people's lives, other realities' lives. But number two, the final events of the movie, the snapping of Thanos means that Thanos from another reality is here. He dies here, he gets snapped here, so in that reality, Thanos will never find the stones, never snap his fingers, so those people got no problems really. I'm thinking that, and the escape of Loki early on using the Tesseract, both of these could actually work as what-if scenarios for the what-if series that Kevin Feige is currently producing for Disney+. But before I move on to the final bit of time travel, Steve Rogers going back in time, returning the stones, ending up with Peggy Carter, let me remind you, if Gamora were to be around still, that means she's not past Gamora, she's not our Gamora, she's the different timeline Gamora. She's an anomaly in this timeline that could continue to live, but nonetheless, not our Gamora. Okay, so let's talk the last one, Captain America traveling back in time, ending up with Peggy Carter. I'm not under the impression that he changed anything when he went back to return the stones. Like basically he might have seen Red Skull, but it was all probably like, hey Red Skull, how you doing bitch? That's all he did over there, nothing major. The only thing that needs explanation over here is how did he end up with Peggy Carter? Now, I don't think that's a timeline-changing event. I think that one is explained by two things. The first of which is your future is in the past when you do time travel, which is basically on the movie. And the second one was the statement by Doctor Strange, if I tell you, it ain't gonna happen. So what's going on over here is that Captain America went back in time, returned the stones, then found Peggy Carter, revealed himself to her, and ended up with her. But that was timeline changing. She would have told him when he was next to her deathbed. That was definitely timeline changing. I think the answer to this one would be no. This is where the whole, they told each other everything, like reported everything to one another comes into play as well, because he probably knew from Doctor Strange if he were to be told what was gonna happen, it wouldn't happen. He would act differently. He would act upon the information that he's got out of her, branching a new timeline where he might do something stupid under the impression that he will not die, that he's destined to end with her, and possibly leading to his premature death. So when he reunites with her, he tells her, okay, you know what, if you ever meet me in the future, don't tell me about any of this. Let me figure it out for myself. If I know, it ain't gonna happen. He probably even tells her that when he knows that a younger version of himself is coming to visit. He explains it to her without giving her so many details. I know what's gonna happen if you do tell me what's going on, if you do tell me that I'm right here hiding in another room or out just until, my other self leaves. Now that also means that their relationship has been kept a secret all the way up until the very end, and it also explains why we never knew who Peggy Carter ended up with. I've read articles talking about timeline hopping for Captain America, and it doesn't make any kind of sense, because simply put, a lot of statements were made on the movie, a lot of explanations were given on the movie, and that basically takes away the need for us to be all smarty pants and try to improvise with explanations. It's really not needed. With that being said though, I try to make this video in such a way that it covered all the bases, left no questions unanswered. So let me know in the comments down below if you've got any questions that I did not cover on this video when it comes to time travel. Let me know as well if you did like this video by dropping it a much appreciated like, subscribing to this channel, and enable notifications to get notified when I upload a new video, post a new community post, or start a new live stream. But until the next time you tune in for another one of my videos, Avengers Endgame or otherwise, thank you so much for tuning into this one, and have a great day.